welcome everyone today. We're really happy to have you. Erik, certainly a pleasure to talk with you. We've worked together for several years here, but also
8
talk about
years.
graphics, which is something that excites me. And we have a few questions from the field. So we'll get a chance to ask those of you as well. Hopefully some easy questions for you. We won't grill you too much. But Erik is our product manager of Hoops Graphics. So that includes Hoops Visualize, which is our desktop and mobile, as well as for AR and VR devices, graphics engine, as well as Hoops Communicator, our cloud and web technology that runs into zero client web client for visualizing engineering graphics. I'm going to actually stop my screen sharing so we can just kind of have a little bit less formal conversation, Erik. Before we get started with some of the questions, maybe you can just give a really brief overview of who you are for those who don't know you, kind of how you landed here at TechSoft, maybe some of your background, and then kind of what I guess I introduced you, but other things you may be focusing on as well that maybe I missed.
Sure. Yeah, so I have been at TechSoft for 8 years, but before that, I actually started working with Visualize back when it was just known as Hoops, way back in 2000, I believe. I worked at one of our resellers now, Spatial. So I was there pre and post Dassault acquisition. And I was a visualization engineer there until they shut down our own visualizations kernel in order to use Hoops, which was fine. I ended up running QA there worldwide for 3.5 years before I switched over and became part of the field team as a consulting engineer. Ended up leaving there, went to work for Mentor Graphics. I actually created what we called the 3D plugin to allow Mentor applications that were 2.5D only to start using full 3D representations. You can actually see that in the Expedition product along with a couple other ones. Again, using Visualize and ACES at the time. And then I actually ended up coming to TechSoft because I was looking for a new opportunity, saw that there was a position open, and it's the only job I've ever actually applied for over Facebook because I was friends with Gavin. And so I reached directly out to him saying, hey, I see you got some stuff going on. And for instance, I had no idea that TechSoft did anything more than just Visualize, right? Anything more than Hoops at the time. So yeah, I actually ended up coming in. I was on the consulting engineer, the field team for 4 years. And then at the end of my first 4 years tour of duty, took over as the product manager for Visualize. And then I've been the PM for Communicator now for 1.5 years. So,
wow.
Yeah. So even before I was working at Spatial, though, in college, for instance, I was doing independent studies around computer animation, which I was the only person doing because my university just did not have anything in the way of cutting edge graphic stuff. I had done computer animation itself, like as an artist, before I realized I didn't have an eye for it. And then outside of tech, so I used to race bikes, all sorts of different bikes. I actually was the director for the best junior cycling program in the US for a number of years, and really into music. So I used to be in a couple bands, and don't play much anymore, but I'd like to. So.
8 years, man, that went fast.
Right? It's crazy when you think about it. And if it wasn't for the sabbatical milestones, you wouldn't have a concrete reminder.
Just kind of blends, yeah. And maybe a little bit of astronomy. I see you have like a sun flare and a sunspot there behind you today.
Yeah, actually, it's a super cool phenomenon. There are two black holes that are actually going to collide with each other, right? So these two
Oh,
are actually
okay.
circling each other, but they're in the orbit of a supermassive, which is the one in the background. So it's obviously an artist's rendering, but I just think it's super cool.
Oh, okay, that is super cool. Great. So thanks for that. I didn't know you applied through Facebook. That's a pretty interesting story. So here's how we're going to run this is for those here in our audience today, if you could open up your chat and you can type in questions into your chat. I guess I should probably open that up as well. So if you have a question, you can type it there and we'll have kind of like a running list of questions that you can ask Erik. about the graphics products. You can ask anything you want, like about TechSoft or about our markets, about our roadmap. But if you could type them there in the chat, that would be great. You can unmute yourself, and it's a small enough group today, which is great. And just ask it, interrupt either me or Eric, and we'll do that. So to kind of get us started, we did have one that was sent in, Eric, and we're going to give priority to that. And
Sure.
we'll you can chat to everyone. You can chat to me, Jonathan. That'd be fine. So a big selling point for Hoops Visualize is the tight integration with the Hoops Exchange. So that's our CAD data translation tool. The two products work together very well. Specifically, one can select a face or an edge in a CAD model, and Visualize will return a full component path into Exchange PRC data. So that's the geometric representation of the CAD data using Hoops Exchange. You can then use that to identify the PRC data for analysis purposes. Communicator is not the same. So we have these two graphics engines, Communicator and Visualize. With Communicator, selection does not give a full path. Rather, a portion of the path is removed. Presumably, this is because the focus in Communicator is rendering, but that seems to ignore the value of the integration with Exchange. Would it be possible to update Communicator so that it does maintain and provide a full, complete component path into the Exchange PRC data, or how can you do that? Is there a path forward already?
Yeah, so a question like this pretty obviously highlights the differences between how the two products work, right? In the case of Visualize and the integration that I think Dave is talking about, if I have to guess who sent it in. Of course, we have Exchange in memory, right? And so Visualize is handling this in-memory mapping to be able to go back and forth. Communicator, of course, was designed as this lightweight viewing engine, and it is missing, we'll say, some functionality that exists in Visualize. Now, of course, when we write out the stream cache files in whichever form you're using, we're not going to embed the PRC or anything like that. So you're not going to have the mapping directly. But having said that, we've talked about this one a couple times internally, and it is certainly a possibility. We've looked at it. I think we will probably add it. Where it would get its value, of course, is then the partner has to have essentially an app running with Exchange in memory. And they would take that essentially full component path, to use the Visualize terminology, or a key path, hand it off to their Exchange enabled application, do whatever it is that they need to do, and then get those results back and pass it back to Communicator. But honestly, I don't see any significant technical hurdles that prevent us from doing it.
Okay, thanks for that, Dave and Eric. How about another question here? What are the different optimizations and calling options that can be used with Visualize to improve rendering performance?
Oh, yeah. I hope we're not going to go too deep on the tech questions. Yeah, I mean, we of course, well, given the calling, I'm going to assume that this is a Visualize question, since Communicator, and it's streaming, and even the SCS loading handles that stuff for you. So we'll focus on Viz. There are a few different calling optimizations enabled, and one of the most common ones that we tell people to use is kind of the most basic, and that's extent calling, right? The idea being that you can specify how much screen space an object can use before you just stop drawing it. Sounds silly, except if you set an object to only use 10 pixels of screen space, well, if you're so zoomed out that that thing is only taking up 10 pixels, unless it's the only thing in your scene, you're not even really going to notice it dropping out. As a CE, we would show people how wide you could set that range and zoom in and out and say, do you even notice these things disappearing? Right. And sometimes we'd be blasting that value up to like 40, 50, 100 to really exaggerate it so that they would understand it popping in and out. In some ways, it's like a poor man's level of detail. Right. We do have some other callings. Of course, when items are off the screen, we don't render them. So essentially, Visualize handles view space calling for you. With the frustum, one of the things that we are considering long term, and maybe not even long term, but quite possibly in the next feature year here, is occlusion calling. Sorry, need more coffee. So the idea being that when something is behind another object, we don't draw it. Now that is tricky because, of course, normally in order to do things like occlusion calling, the standard practice has been to pre-process the scene, right? So you break things down so that you understand clearly what is visible based on where you are, and that works for static objects really well. It doesn't work so well when you're talking about things that move around. But when you're looking at a large BIM model, large AEC model, or a factory, you get a big performance jump if you can immediately say, well, I am in this area and I can't see 95% of this model, so why am I even worrying about it? So we are looking at that. But like I said, that one does require a pre-processing stage, and it is a lot more work. In the meantime, one of the things that we have, one of the features that we have queued up to work on next year is actually finally bringing a level of detail algorithm into HPS. Now, if you've been using 3DF, you of course know that we have it, but it doesn't play well with the other optimizations we have. So for instance, static model, right? A huge amount of our performance work typically goes into the static model algorithm and being able to generate a very fast scene graph based on your data. And the problem we have with the level of detail in 3DF right now is it essentially invalidates the display lists, especially when you talk about it at the segment level. And so it has to recompute them. And there's a performance hit there. And you have to get enough of a performance jump from using the levels of detail to make up for the fact that you are trying to calculate it, right? So as I move the camera, Visualize has to actually go through and say, which LED do I need? Which LED do I need? Which lot, which lot, which lot? And so you have to get enough performance benefit. So what we're looking at is writing a new algorithm, which will work in tandem with static model and the segment level display lists. Basically, instead of recompiling them, we would just have separate branches where we decide which display list we will pump through to the driver. And that way we don't have to recompute. Now, of course, there's multiple ways then where you say, well, how are we going to get the information? We're looking at basically making it a simple option for anyone using the Exchange sprocket to calculate out these level of details automatically, or exposing it via the API so that if you are inserting your data directly yourself, you can also author those lower levels of detail. So really do think that that's going to get us a big performance benefit.
Yeah. So, okay, just to make sure we focus on that question. So the main thing for Visualize for improving performance, particularly with calling, would be extent calling. Is that right?
Yes.
And we're working on occlusion calling.
Well, we're not working on it yet. It is definitely something on the long-term roadmap. It's a pretty sizable investment as to yeah.
So I think that's important. Let's maybe talk about that a little bit, is things that are on the roadmap versus nice to haves. And so there was that question about getting more of the path to objects selected in communicator. That's nice to have,
right,
but it's not on our roadmap. How do we know what's on the roadmap coming? Like for people out here in our audience, how do we know that it's there? And if it's not, if let's say a feature that we're really interested in is not on that roadmap, how does one go about trying to get that prioritized and creating a case for that? And how is that decided at TechSoft?
Okay. So I guess let's talk about communicating the roadmap out first. We'll chunk those into two different things. Truthfully, what usually happens is we either have a public forum, right? Such as not necessarily this, but we always have the Hoop Summits in any non-COVID year where we get out and we try to talk about that. Now, I know we actually had feedback. We did not spend enough time talking about the roadmap in last year's Hoop Summits. We did try to address that. The other way it happens is if we have meetings with partners, we of course talk about roadmaps, and typically in those meetings we talk about each of our respective products. So if I am meeting with, Jonathan Inc., I want to know what you're looking at for your application, where you see the challenges and what your future needs for the product are going to be, because I want that to help shape our roadmap. And then we give you insight into what's planned. Typically, the roadmap is focused in the next release, right? And the reason for that is those are the items that we are obviously most certain that we are going to work on. For instance, we are obviously working on stuff for the 2021 releases now. Anything else is essentially, we can break it down as, I gotta have this. These are the must-haves. These are the things that I would like to have, right? Should haves, and plenty of times there's the won'ts, right? But so there's one key thing, which I'm sure most of the people on the call are thinking is, yeah, but you've never had a meeting like that with me. And the truth is, Visualize has a huge number of partners. And one of the things that we've talked about, and I've brought up repeatedly, is we need to change the method that we communicate things like roadmaps to our partners. Making them public would be a big jump forward, so that anyone can just go and hit our site and see what we have planned for the next release or beyond, right? And with the switch over to Jira Service Desk, I think we actually are aligning in that direction. And this is something that we should be rolling out before the end of the year, so that all of our partners can see what is on that roadmap. And of course, we're all in software. We all know roadmaps are fluid, roadmaps change, right? Based on what we can get done, but also what we decide those biggest needs are. So, which then I guess feeds well into,
Yeah, no, I just wanted to show that to everyone here. If you haven't seen it already, is we have moved from our support ticketing system from Eventum to Jira Service Desk, and we've already kind of started down that road of making things public. So let's say, for instance, Hoops Visualize, you're interested in at least the release dates of upcoming release dates. They're here for the duration of this year and into the next year for all of our different products. So we do keep this updated. And you're saying that, Eric, we would like to add more context to what is going to be in these releases as well.
Yeah, exactly. So what I would see happening is, maybe not on this exact page, because this is a complete list of the releases for that next year. But maybe there's a separate link that says, product roadmap, because it is something that we do work on and we update regularly. So putting it out there and actually letting our partners see it, so that you have insight into it, would definitely be a big step forward. Great. So, which I guess then brings us to the second half of your question, which is, how can a partner influence what goes into that? And so let's talk about the current process, and then we can talk about what we'd like to change. Right now, essentially, in order for a partner to get something into a release, there's one of two ways, right? With a lot of our big features, we're actually reaching out to people and finding sponsors for the features, right? We know that you're interested in this. They've talked to us before. We really want this thing. We pull a pile of people together and we talk regularly to make sure that we're building the feature that is going to solve your problem. And in a lot of cases, we actually want to collaborate with that. We'll give you a developer build, you play with it, you give us your feedback, and we take that into account and modify it as we develop. The other way, the way that it is typically worked, is you, of course, log a feature request with, it used to be Eventum, now it would be Jira Service Desk. You put in all the pertinent information. The product managers go through, regularly. We look and we see what's in there, and we decide which of those things we have to put in. Now, as you can imagine, there are an awful lot of feature requests that come in with a wide range of functionality, and we can't get them all. And so what we try to do is we, of course, try to hit the most critical ones. So when someone says, I absolutely have got to have this, if someone says, this is preventing me from shipping my application, or is preventing me from being able to sell into this market, well, we're going to try to knock that out, especially if it's something that we can do in a reasonable amount of time. If a feature is going to take me 9 man-months to develop, and it's only going to benefit that one partner, that is a lot harder to justify as compared to something that might take 9 months, which would benefit 20 or 30 partners or more, right? So for instance, level of detail, that's going to impact almost everybody, right? So that's a lot easier to justify. And of course, there's an escalation process, right? So you may have put that request in. Maybe it wasn't a burning crisis originally, but now it is. You escalate either through your partner development manager or through support. That makes its way to the product managers or the product owners. And then, that typically is how things get moved to the top is, no, I really, really need this. And this is why. So.
Yeah, thanks for that.
Oh, wait.
More.
So
okay.
So there is one other way that we're. So I mentioned that there's other things that we'd like to change, and we've talked about it, and there's no concrete plan. But certainly, we've seen that a lot of companies are essentially opening up the ability to not only see the roadmap, but possibly vote on prospective items for it. And we haven't figured out a mechanism. This is down our priority list of things that we think would help our partners. But I really would like to get to the point where essentially partners and prospects can submit ideas and then review what has been submitted and vote on them, because that would also help us understand how many people it would impact, how many people would benefit from it, and who we can work with while we are developing that feature. And I think all three of those things would lead us to make better software, which better solves your problems.
Yeah, we saw that last week where Lionel was asking questions about C# wrappers, and we just had a vote on her Ask Me Anything for a C# wrapper. And we're like, wow, more than half of the attendees were interested in that. So that's kind of a very informal way of taking a poll, but I think that was pretty enlightening. All right, next, thank you, Eric. Thank you for that. Next question, why should I consider migrating to HPS? So we do have two different interfaces into our desktop graphics kernel. So 3DF and HPS, which is object oriented versus more of a single, I don't know, structured way of walking a scene graph. So besides that, why else would people want to migrate to HPS? Not saying that you need to, but could you give some reasons?
Yeah, sure. Typically, when you talk about migrating, you're talking about redoing your graphics system. And that is not a small effort, right? A visualized powered application has its little fingers all over the place, right? Inside your operators, inside a lot of your logic. And so honestly, we don't necessarily encourage people to do it because it is a lot of work. It's one reason that I've never sent out a message saying, we're going to kill off 3DF and you need to migrate, because I know how much pain that is going to cause, right? Would we like if all of our partners were on one interface? Yes, sure, of course. But I'm not going to tell somebody who has an application that has been developed and built and stable that, oh, sorry, you have to rip this out and switch over to this other interface, because that'd be pushing a huge amount of work on you. And it's just not worth it. So if for an existing app that's already out there in production, typically we say, don't. There's no compelling reason, unless you found that there was some functionality that you weren't able to get in 3DF. But honestly, if it's missing, that shouldn't be the case outside of mobile platforms, right? Now, when we talk about, or when we suggest to people that they should consider moving to HPS, it's almost always for your next application, right? So we have a partner who has a desktop application they've been using Visualize for years, they have their data in it, and now they want to do a mobile app, or they're looking to make their next generation software. Maybe it's WPF C# based or Qt Quick, whatever. That is when we then say, okay, this is the time to look at HPS, especially if you want to do a mobile app. Those are really the only times that we strongly push. If you're going to build a new app, please make the switch. The logic is very similar. The scene graph is the same, right? It's not, they're very similar, except in the way that you actually access it in the APIs, and there's objects. And, if you're switching over and building a C# application, you want to move to HPS because that's a full C# implementation versus the subset that we wrapped in 3DF.
So the answer, just to kind of consolidate that, is if you're building a new application, particularly on mobile, but even on desktop, we'd recommend using HPS. But other than that, in terms of performance or features, 3DF is in parity or close to parity with HPS.
Right, and there's an important follow-on point there, Jonathan, and that is, as we add functionality to HPS, we also want to add it to 3DF. So for instance, when we add this new level of detail algorithm, that will also go into 3DF.
Great. All right, here's our question. In past meetings, the idea of a possible future integration between Hoops Visualize, well, that's a good question, and Hoops Communicator in such a way that, for example, a native 3D viewer can receive the model data from a Hoops Communicator rendering server was floated. Is this something that is still somewhere out there as a possible future enhancement? Or alternatively, there's quite some mobile development going on related to our software, and the current workaround some of our teams are using is to embed web viewers in Android apps in order to display Hoops Communicator's web viewer in there and connect to the Hoops Communicator rendering server. While I understand this is not currently an officially supported scenario, are there any considerations to make it one in the future? So before you kick this off, Eric, I do want to clarify this one question, and that connection between Hoops Communicator kind of streaming data from a server and a desktop application consuming that. You can either consume geometry or a render stream. And I believe that Florian uses a render stream. So can you talk to both of those?
Sure. Yeah, so actually, as of HPS 2020 Service Pack 2, we have just released a communicator sprocket, which will enable you to do exactly this. What it does is it allows a Visualize application to connect to a communicator server so that you can take advantage of that streaming. You can bring down your files. It will interactively stream the same way that you are used to with your web viewer. But it will also allow you to load in the standalone stream cache files. So for instance, the Scs files, so it gives you access to both the streaming and the actual communicator data if you're not using a streaming implementation. So if you're using an SCS way. Now that is brand new, right? Service Pack 1 went out, Service Pack 2 was just released last week, but we do believe that this is an important piece of functionality. We've actually been working on it for a couple of releases. It was previously targeted for SP1 because we do get these requests, right? For quite some time, we've had communicator customers, partners, who have said, I want to be able to load in my communicator data files into my Visualize application, especially around mobile, right? Because I agree, Florian, the embedding the web view inside a mobile app is just not the best solution. So we're trying to provide a better way for you to do this.
Great. So I'm looking at our release notes here for SP2. And it looks like we have a link. We also have sandbox applications in the distribution. So sandbox apps for iOS and Android. And we also have the Sprocket, which is that kind of higher level connection between the two products. Loading a model over a network, right? So there's loading a local model, getting a reference to the model. And so I haven't looked through this extensively yet, but instead of just providing a network path, can I provide an endpoint, let's say, to an S3 bucket, or at least a stream cache server running on a server not on my network, Eric?
You should be able to, Jonathan.
All right, let's do that. since we're here, Erik, let's talk about a few of the other major features of the SP2 release, since we're
Sure.
kind of in this. Can you just talk about what you're excited about here, and also why we focused on these for this release?
Yeah, sure. So before I dig into the individual features, I want to reference something that we talked about in the Hoops Summits last year in Amsterdam and in the States. And that was, we're really trying to bring our two different graphics products closer together. I don't mean that we're going to combine them and we're going to have a fourth graphics API. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, if you are developing software on both of these graphics kernels, we want you to have similar experiences. We want your customers to have similar experiences. We don't want them to be completely different. So when we add functionality to one of them, we want to make sure that we do the same on the other. And this year, we've finally really started trying to bring those two together. And SP2 has a few different initiatives that came together, bringing these kernels closer. One of the things that we focused on was performance. Okay, and let me talk about HPS first, and then I'll talk about communicator. Obviously, performance is key for most of our partners. And what we did, we went through and looked at where we felt we could improve performance, and it was a sizable effort on both teams. In the case of Visualize, we did things such as speeding up the actual sprocket implementation. So we increased our frames per second when you have loaded an item through the sprocket. And we've done that essentially by doing a post-processing cleanup stage, which resulted in a much cleaner scene graph. So we've seen a sizable jump forward. We've improved static model so that it can integrate render path conditions, and you can actually see that on the screen right now. The performance kit set static conditions, etc. And one of the other things that we did, we spent a lot of time this year working on our show, hide, isolate algorithms in Visualize, and we did find that as you hid more items through the sprocket, performance degraded, and so we actually improved that. We got rid of that bug, and so we have much improved operations after you've hidden a sizable amount of geometry. So there was quite a lot of work that went into performance there. On the communicator side, obviously the two products have different workflows, et cetera. So what we worked on is going to be different. We spent a lot of time focusing on improving our SCS file performance. For those that are unfamiliar, these are self-contained stream cache files. They don't require streaming, and that works really well in a PLM type workflow. And some of our largest communicator partners are using SCS files. And so what we did, we had one go around where we improved the loading time of SCS, and then we went through and we did it again. In fact, we also worked on our SCS shattered implementation, which, if you're unfamiliar with shattered mechanism, it comes from Exchange. The idea being, if I have a very large complicated assembly, I don't want to convert that into one giant monolithic file, because if one single part changes, I have to regenerate the entire thing. So shattered lets us say, take the whole assembly. If any one piece changes, we just have to reconvert that, and it's only at view time that we have to pull this stuff together. Well, we found a very large discrepancy between our shattered SCS loading and the monolithic SCS, which contained everything. And we fixed that. So that made a huge difference for one of our key partners. And so that there's an obvious jump forward for any shattered SCS implementation. And then finally, for our partners in the BIM space, we actually reduced the time that it takes to open IFC files. And we did that by cleaning up our implementation under the hoods. So, okay. So those are the performance improvements that we had. Now, there was another item. Obviously, the Hoops communicator sprocket was something that both teams had to work on. For those that that haven't heard about this or looked at it, you could imagine that it wasn't really as simple as just connecting Visualize to a communicator server. And so there are libraries on the back end that we use, which actually enabled the communicator sprocket in order to work. So this was very much another cross-team effort, which has seen good results. So we're very happy with that. And then finally, a big one that we have partners dealing with the BIM space, even if it isn't their core sector. And more, we are getting requests to deal with very large, essentially modeling matrices or transforms, or the most common case is what we're seeing is GPS coordinates put inside IFC files. And so the model is actually located at its actual construction location versus some, being located at just the origin in the file. And the problem that we have is the rendering engines are, of course, floats, right? So everything gets boiled down to floats in order to get piped through to the drivers, and we suffer from precision problems, and it causes camera issues and Z fighting and all sorts of bad behavior. And so both teams worked extensively on finding a way to resolve these problems. Now, for Visualize, we added an option that lets you essentially handle these very large transforms, and you can actually see it called out there. And the idea being, in the case of an IFC model that is located at its actual GPS coordinate, well, that is handled as a transform, essentially up at the top of the model. And what we do is we can extract that, we can save it off, and then essentially treat the model as being localized. And this fixes the rendering issues for the most part, because we are now bringing it into a reasonable coordinate space, right? It is documented inside the feature list. You can find it inside the HPS docs. We also outline how to work with essentially these large models if you're inserting the data directly, right? Because we do have a suggested workflow. And I know that we have we have several partners in the BIM space, in the shipbuilding space, for instance, where we haven't really sat down and said, this is your workflow, this is what we think you should do. And so, we really tried to lay it out as clearly as possible. Now, Communicator actually was able to handle it slightly differently. And the reason for that is because our JavaScript API already supports doubles. We were able to work some magic with the transforms, moving stuff back and forth. And so we've resolved that also in Communicator. So your Communicator powered BIM app or anyone looking to load in these large models, it should just work out of the box. Yeah, and in fact, the HDV, right, the demo app for Exchange and Visualize has this large model transform set by default. And so throw a model at it and it should just work.
Great. So just to recap, Service Pack 2 for HPS particularly, improving performance for static trees, large model transforms. We went out of beta for this connection to a communicator server streaming data down. Yeah, that's great. And very similar improvements in Communicator. Here's a question about Hoops Visualize, particularly for Android, about point clouds in Hoops Visualize for Android. Are there improvements, or have there been recent improvements?
There haven't been any specific improvements around point clouds in Visualize, but that is an area that we have marked for both of the products, is to offer better point cloud support. In particular, we know that our partners in the BIM space, we're seeing more and more points, right? There's entire workflows being built around huge amounts of points, and the technology just keeps getting better and better. There's going to be more and more of it, and we need to be able to support that and handle it. Android, of course, we're dealing with a mobile platform. It can be hardware constrained. So we need to find other ways to handle it. Now, of course, that's assuming that you aren't interested in using our out of core point cloud support. But Actually, I mean, well, I don't, I'd have to go back and check. I don't know that we have the out of core generator on Android, or whether it would have to get pre-processed and then viewed. But no, so short answer, right now, no, there have not been any recent improvements, especially on Android. However, it is an area, a tentative item on the roadmap.
Yeah, so I think that's interesting. On desktop, we're able to stream a very large point cloud from disk that we pre-process. So there's a pre-processing engine for point clouds. We could stream it in, and that allows us to visualize a subset of the points that exist in the data set. If we pre-process, let's say there's a two-step. So you have to pre-process all your data. You create this kind of like flat database file of all of your points, or not a flat, like a spatially organized file. And then once you have that file, you can load it. You said you're not sure if we have that pre-processing native to Android. That's fine. So let's say we pre-process it elsewhere, but could I put one of those out of core point cloud files on an Android device and stream it into Visualize? Do we have the libraries built to do that for Android?
You know, I have to check on that.
All right, that's fine.
We may not. I know we have it for the desktop platforms.
Yeah, we stumped you. All right, that's a good
did.
job. How about this? I know Communicator also supports point clouds and streaming. Would there be a benefit of moving to streaming Communicator data into an Android application if it's point cloud data?
It depends. It depends what you want to do with it, right? So earlier I mentioned that the two products have some different functionalities and workflows, right? And it just depends what you want to do with it. So to edit and save the point clouds, then Communicator is not the best way forward, because right now, in order to get it into Communicator and take advantage of the streaming, you have to convert it over to a stream cache. So essentially a pre-processing stage, just like we talk about for out of core point clouds. You could then load it in, but if you remove those points or some of those points, you can't just serialize that back. And that is a long-standing issue that we want to resolve, is this ability to edit and serialize those changes back. Right now, that just isn't possible.
Yeah.
But if you just wanted to be able to display, tons of data, and you just want to view it and interrogate it, then that can be an option.
Great. So I'll put an action item, Eric, for you to get back. We'll get back to you on that question when it comes to out of core point cloud visualization on Android. Okay. So maybe we can follow up just with the full answer to that question.
Sure.
Next one, is it possible in the future to access all geometries in the IFC files directly from Hoops Visualize?
Yeah. So in the future, certainly. Well, so let me break this into two pieces, right? Because of course, I assume we are talking about loading IFC in through Exchange, right? And then it's coming into Visualize through the Sprocket. Now, we know that Exchange does not currently support all of the entities inside IFC. There's actually quite a few in there. Some that would just get mapped out to attributes, but others that we don't support yet. The goal through the Sprocket and through the converter for Communicator is to support everything that we get from Exchange. So as Exchange adds support for entities in the IFC file format, we will support them inside Visualize and Communicator. Now, having said that, and Lionel isn't on the call, so I don't want to put words in his mouth, and I can't commit to anything on his roadmap, but we are actively working on IFC improvements. So
I know that is an area of R&D right now for sure. The Hoops Communicator server-side rendering process takes a stream cache path. The actual model name is supplied in the client-side web viewer. Are there any recommendations of restricting access for a given rendering process, so only a specific set of models can be loaded, short of copying them into a separate directory for each rendering process and using a temporary stream cache?
Yeah, so we get questions about having Communicator handle security. and access protocols like this. It does happen every now and then, but honestly, we're not interested really in focusing on that. And the reason I say that is there's other technologies out there that are focused specifically on, controlling what people get access to, et cetera. It is not our our value add. It's not our domain. What we focus on is providing you, the tools to build great engineering software. And so rather than trying to tackle all the security stuff, and there's a lot of different ways that could be solved in a lot of different platforms, and that's just not, we don't want to try to add that. Or if we did add it and then we said, well, you need this functionality, but we only provide it on this platform. If you're using an AWS or you're using Azure, and then restricting you to have to use those. So we'd rather, each of our partners pick how they're going to handle it on their platform and then slot that into your tech stack.
Okay, thanks. We're building a spline-based modeling program. As such, it employs dynamic topological mesh data structures in the vein of half-edge structure and similar. Faces are cut and merged, and so are edges and vertices. Well, that's interesting. There's a lot of topological modification, as is usual for a modeling program. I'm not sure whether Hoops Visualize is currently flexible enough to maintain a visualization of such a dynamic mesh efficiently, because it seems to require a level of control that is lower than currently available. What are your thoughts on this?
So, to be fair, I'm not as familiar with the workflow that we're talking about here as compared to a standard BREP type modeling application. But we, of course, have a lot of different modeling apps, typically using BREPs, that are built on top of Visualize, right? And have been for years. In fact, we continue to have more and more of them. Our largest, well, we have two resellers, right? We have Spatial, who make ASIS, and we have Siemens, who make Parasolid, right? So the two leading modeling kernels out there are licensing Visualize as their graphics engine for new application development and the existing legacy ones. So it's certainly capable of handling the transforms and the modifications that occur there. And in some cases that can include, direct modeling applications, things that are not doing the typical, I'm going to perform a Boolean, I'm going to do this, that, blah, blah, blah. So, I can't, without understanding the workflow better, I can't say, yes, of course we can support that. I would certainly be interested in understanding more what's so different about it that it would be concerning versus all the applications that already use it.
Yeah, I think I know in most of those workflows, you have a topological description behind the graphical representation. Mm-hmm. And so there's always a step when you modify the structure, let's say the spline, the mesh, the BREP, there's a step where you tessellate it and you ask for the facets. And so I know Parasolid does that, where you just say, give me the graphical elements, and we recreate the face, or we recreate the solid, or the entire assembly, let's say. So that's a pretty common workflow. We'd love to connect you with one of our consulting engineers to kind of specifically dig into that problem. So I'm making a note to do that, because there are so many variants of that.
Right. And, we used to have a NURB surface, I believe, inside 3DF. I can't remember if we brought that into HPS, or what the support for that would be. But the idea being that it would add, as you modified that object, it would dynamically, modify the mesh. So
hello, can I say something?
Sure,
please.
Okay, so greetings from Finland. So nice for you to have this meeting.
Hello.
Yeah, so I was just asking about that spline thing. Yeah, so now I just blacked out. um, yeah, so we are doing this this kind of modifications to the mesh, and then I've kind of found it difficult to maintain the visualization mesh, because the way I've done it before is that I would have a direct control for the triangle lists.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I remove my face, which might contain many corners, and the triangulation was on my control. So that way, I also had the control over the triangle list. So when I removed, for example, the face, then I could modify the triangle list, and in optimal time, I could maintain the visualization, as valid. And now I'm kind of thinking about the same kind of functionality in hoops, and that I found that it's I can find similar kind of control there. So I just wonder if I can efficiently maintain the visualization under these kind of safe face removals.
Well, so I would say it depends on how you org visualization data. For us, that's actually the most critical part. How it gets inserted into the scene graph. For instance, not using static model. We talk about it as a big performance leader, but are editing geometry frequently. It of course recomputes and regenerates, and so you would want to turn that off, or you would have a performance hit there.
Sorry, turn what
yeah,
off?
Sorry, static model, the static model optimization. But like Jonathan said, I think it would be best to actually connect you with a consulting engineer so that they could sit down, understand, take a look at how best to implement visualize in your workflow. And I know we have one on the line right now, but I'm not going to put anybody on the spot. So
yeah, that would be
so they
good.
can actually work with you. Yeah, it's truthfully one of the most important parts, whether it's a very standard kind of workflow, or if it's I have a very particular workflow in my application. The most important part is getting access to a consulting engineer, having them really help you get stuff set up and take advantage of our different optimizations, learn how to organize the scene graph, and really work inside your workflow with our product. We'd like Visualize and Communicator to get to the point where somebody can just watch a couple of videos and do a great implementation, but we are not there yet. So
yeah, okay, thank you. I will wait for the consultant.
Yeah, thanks for that question though. Let's sneak in one more question before we reach the end of our hour. We noticed that we often filter stuff on our database on the server, send huge integer arrays with object IDs to the client, and then have the client call methods on the Hoops Communicator web viewer. Probably send back those object IDs arrays at least when the server-side rendering is active. Sounds wasteful. Beside unnecessarily blocking the client, have you considered or investigated any possibilities of letting other server-side code talk directly to the rendering process? For instance, push in said huge arrays and get back a small handle that the client can use.
okay.
That's a deep
That's
one.
a big one.
Yeah. Sorry, Eric.
That's quite the mouthful.
Sorry for the long sentences.
No, that's fine. That's fine. I knew who that was going to be from. At this point, I won't say that we haven't considered it. We have talked about finding some different ways to handle essentially these messaging when it's large amounts of data. Certainly, Florian, you're not the only partner dealing with enormous models or dealing with filters where a user says, well, I just need to see these things, or, you know, the application is dynamically saying, please change the status of these, you know, this very large set of objects. And it is magnified. You're right, when you're doing server-side rendering, because you have to pass it back and forth to the server. So we have talked about some different ways, or at least considered, you know, what can we do to optimize it. We are going to continue looking at performance improvements in different workflows. And you're not the only partner dealing with these massive models and server-side rendering. So this is definitely on our radar as a possible improvement, that we have to be able to handle these large models and user interactions in server-side rendering.
It's a tough one. Yeah. Okay. So before we go, if everybody could humor me and open up your chat window, your participants window. I have two questions. I have something, Eric, I have a question about that I'd like to pose to our audience. And that is something that I'm passionate about, and that's AR. And we know that the HoloLens 2 was released and is now commercially available. But I'm curious, we have on the roadmap supporting the HoloLens 2. It does require porting some of our libraries to ARM to do that, ARM64 for Windows. Mm-hmm. Of the people here who are using our technology, who feels like in the next, let's say 18 months, they would, or at some point, feel like they have within their roadmap an interest in supporting the HoloLens as a possible way of deploying their application? So if you open up your chat and say yes, or no, I'd really appreciate that, just so that we have an idea.
Yeah, so Jonathan, actually, if I can jump in, we actually should be sending out a survey to our partners on this topic, on whether or not people are considering AR, VR functionality in either adding it to their existing application or making a new one. And this is something that we're going to be doing a little bit more of. We actually sent out a survey to a specific set of partners a while back to look at some different stuff. And again, a way for us to canvas and get information from our partners about things you might be interested in. So when this one comes out, does it mean that we're going to focus specifically on AR, VR? No, it means that we are collecting information on what our partners are planning on doing and if there's interest there.
Okay, great. So I wasn't aware of that. So that's fantastic. Now, if you still have your chat open, I would like to thank Eric. Thank you so much for spending time with us, taking some of those hard questions. Hopefully they weren't too tough, but could we just see a show of hands or a yes or no that we spent an hour together? Was this valuable to you, the people here that were joining us today? It is what it is. Yeah. I'm just making a note because we'd like to do stuff like this again, and we're just experimenting with different opportunities to connect with our partners. So we'd like to thank you, Eric, again, and thank you so much for your time. Thank you, everyone, for being our partners. We're so grateful to be able to work with you and to be able to support you with our technology. And it's exciting to see what you're doing with our technology, trying to solve some tough problems out there for sure. And we look forward to seeing you either here in the virtual space or in person, hopefully someday soon. But again, thank you, everyone. We're going to say goodbye, and we'll connect some other time when we have our official, let's say, our 2021 product releases. Also, we have some training coming up in the next couple weeks, so check that out on our website. A variety of different training topics around Communicator and Visualize and Exchange. All right, thank you, everyone. Goodbye for now.
Great. Thanks, everybody.